Hello, everybody. My name is Mirko Novakovic. I am co-founder and CEO of Zero, and welcome to Code Red. Code, because we are talking about code, and Red stands for requests, errors, and duration, the core metrics of observability. On this podcast, you will hear from leaders around our industry about what they are building, what's next in observability, and what you can do today to avoid your next outage. Today, my guest is Marcin Wyszynski. Marcin is technical co-founder and chief R&D officer at Spacelift, a platform designed to enhance infrastructure as code management. He's also the co-founder and main sponsor of OpenTofu, which we will talk about, and he previously worked at both Google and Facebook. Marcin, happy to have you on board here today.
Thanks for having me here, Mirko. Looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, and I always start the conversation with one question, which is, what was your biggest Code Red moment where something went totally wrong?
Just one? I probably have a whole book of those. I can give you the most expensive one. So I was back at Google working on cold storage, tape libraries. Like imagine a high-tech company like Google is using tapes to back up data. And we were backing up a lot of data. Obviously, a lot of data was actually Gmail. Now with Gmail has so much data that they occupied a lot of our tapes. And some of that data is quite time sensitive. So what we thought, or what they thought, Google thought, well, we should probably have a way to very quickly get the right data replayed or retrieved from the tapes. Now, if you have a lot of data, then you have a problem with how many tapes do I need to retrieve to get like a part of my Gmail back. Now, luckily, Gmail was sharded. So shards like were logical and physical data centers, and that, what they figured out is that when something goes wrong, it generally goes wrong in one or two shards, and there are like 50 of them, right? So the logical approach is to essentially back up each shard separately. Cool, there's enough data for us to actually not make a difference. And we assumed, okay, if the tape is already open in a library, then we just prioritize it for the shards. So each tape, each shard gets its own tapes, but because there's so much data, there's always going to be, let's say you're shard 21 of Gmail, there's always going to be a tape in a library for shard 21, right? And we had multiple libraries per region. Like they're behemoths, like a $10 million behemoth sitting in the middle of a data center with like 64 drives each and like 10 libraries for storing tapes for quick retrievals. So like beasts, really, really beasts. 8 robots per each library. And so, but here's a question, right? Gmail is such a big part of what we do. Will that increase costs, or will that decrease the capacity for everyone else? And my work as an SRE was to do the calculation, to replay how it would impact, like if we started sharding Gmail backups, how would it impact our costs and our capacity for other users? And so what I did is like I essentially took all the historical data and replayed it with different parameters to simulate a few options. And I made an assumption that if a tape is open in one library in one region, then the data will be prioritized in there, right? It's an obvious assumption to make, and the assumption was wrong. The code that was meant to do this was commented out. And essentially, when the data came for a given project, like combination of project and shard, you wouldn't care whether there was a tape open in whatever library in the region. You'd open a tape in another library. So you'd first choose a library, and then you'd choose a tape, rather than choose a tape first and then choose a library. It is so stupid that we never assumed that it would be the case. And the code was there to make it different, but it was commented out. So we start backing up Gmail data. We're so happy it goes live. And everyone starts complaining, the libraries are not backing up anything but Gmail? You know that each Gmail tape now is about 10% capacity because there's not enough data, because they're opening a Gmail tape in every chart, in every library. And suddenly all of the operations came to a halt. All of them, right? So now you have two options. Like, obviously you can't continue. Obviously you have to stop it. And then what do? Do you fix the code? Do you essentially tell Gmail people, no, it's probably not going to do that? It was actually the latter. We told them, look, we're not going to fix the code. We're actually building a new system. For now, you probably want to back up to disk and to tape, with tape being your last resort. You're probably going to have more luck doing like restore from disk first, and then if you're missing some data, then we'll retrieve it from tape. But we essentially said, look, the code is so, we don't even understand, like, why don't we uncomment the code? Well, probably it was commented for a reason, and because it was a legacy system and we were working on a new system, it was more like, okay, what are the unintended consequences of uncommenting this code? We actually didn't know. And so, like, I know it sounds crazy that we didn't just fix it, but we don't know what the unintended consequences were. It's like there is this rule that if you don't, like Chesterton's fence, right? If you don't understand why there's a fence, I will not let you remove it. I will only let you remove the fence once you explain to me why it existed in the first place and why it no longer applies. So that's why we chose to roll back fully and not try to do some shenanigans. But it was pretty drastic. Like, it was like, Google backup, tape backup is completely broken right now. All we do is we back up some Gmail data, nothing else, right? So if something happened in the meantime, oh my.
Yeah. I mean, it's not the first Google Code Red moment here in this series. We had a few Google, but I always, there's two things I always learn. One is the scale is just crazy, right? And so the problems are very specific, but can have a really high impact, right? That's A. But B, what I really like is that you kind of think that Google is doing things like very differently, but then finally you hear, hey, they have tapes and tape robots, and they do backups on tapes like a lot of companies, right? And so it's normal technology, right? Yeah. Just on a different level and scale.
Different scale for sure. But again, like, it's still humans, and humans will make mistakes and robots will break. So it's like you'll get the same failure modes at Google as everywhere else. Google is not magical. I mean, it's like a very well-run company, and SRE at Google is very strong. There's a culture of reliability and there's competence. Still, humans are humans.
Yeah. Yeah. And how did you get then from Google, Facebook, to becoming a co-founder of Spacelift? Did you first do the OpenTofu step and then founded Spacelift, or was it Spacelift and then?
So I left Facebook because I wanted to move back to my home country, to Poland, when my first child was born. I really wanted them to grow up with family around. I was in Ireland for Facebook, not just in Ireland, but mainly based in Ireland, and I thought, like, I miss my family, and I'd love the kid to be raised with family. So for 2 years, I worked in my friend's software studio on an internal startup that they were trying to kickstart. It was static code analysis. It's still around. It's called CodeBeat, but it didn't really take off. After 2 years of it not taking off, I kind of gave up. I saw it going really nowhere, and I wasn't really interested in software studio work. So I was like, well, I love cloud, and I will do some cloud consulting. So I built cloud at Google. I built cloud at Facebook. I'll build on the cloud now. And so I was consulting for numerous companies, mainly in Europe. For example, like Teal Mobility. Like, I can hear a German accent, so you probably know Teal Mobility, right?
Yes.
Berlin-based, but also Deliveroo, which is UK-based. They're pretty popular. It's like a DoorDash in Europe. And as part of, especially Deliveroo, I was leading a major replatforming from Heroku, which was not scaling. Even, like, it was the largest installation of Heroku in the world in history. Deliveroo at some point. It was just not, like Heroku could not ship what Deliveroo wanted. Heroku was actually begging Deliveroo to get off Heroku as soon as possible. And so we did, but as part of that, we needed to re-platform to AWS, and a large part of that was Terraform. I got, on behalf of that client, I got an approval for Terraform Enterprise, which was the HashiCorp official product. TLDR it was so bad that it nearly wiped our production. And then I had to go back to Circle CI, and it was like, I said sorry to my boss. I didn't know. I meant well. I understand that I'm on a very good day, right? And I still costed you like a few £100 for Terraform Enterprise. I'll make it up to you. And she's like, no, there's no need. Like, humans make mistakes. I'm like, no, honestly, I feel I can do better. So I built Terraform Enterprise as a way of saying sorry. I retained the IP rights. And what I noticed is that when I built it, it was an instant success. But what I also noticed is that when people were leaving Deliveroo for other companies, and in City of London, you have a lot of people moving around, right? So like, people are moving to like Form 3, people are moving to all the different banks in the City of London, all the different hedge funds. The first thing that they would do is when they looked at the infrastructure, how infrastructure was done in those new companies, they would come back to me and ask me, can I implement this in their new company? And I thought, maybe some of the ideas that I had were not that bad. So what I did is I went to HashiCorp and applied for a product manager role for Terraform Enterprise. I said, look, I had an experience with your product. The experience was so fruitful that I built something different. And I wanted to show you some of the ideas, and maybe we can collaborate. And they went like, you're crazy. And like, I don't think so. And I like proving people that I'm not crazy, so I started my own business.
That's good. That's a good way to start it. But at that time, it was still Terraform. It was not yet forked to OpenTofu, or?
No, OpenTofu was 2 years ago when, for 9 years, HashiCorp has been benefiting from the open source community. So Terraform was open source, the provider ecosystem was open source. And this is essentially, they built the whole company around open source. And when the business was not going great, they said, joke, we were joking. It's actually like, we're closing the source now. It's going to be BSL, business source license, right? So not open source. It's a pay to play. We get to choose whether you all allowed to use it or not allowed to use it. And we thought, we're not using Terraform directly. Our customers are using Terraform directly, but it's horrible for a user base, right? It's putting the future out, the whole community in jeopardy, right? It's putting our business model in jeopardy. And when that BSL change happened, we essentially got together with our beloved competitors, and we said, look, we need to keep the open source infrastructure alive, not just for our own businesses, but also for the whole community that depends on this being available, right? You can't imagine how many different open source, but also commercial systems have Terraform as some part of dependency. Like a good part of CNCF ecosystem is based on Terraform in one shape or another, right? It's like one of those very foundational technologies. And it turns out that if you do a rug pull on that key technology that underpins a lot of cloud, then a lot of people get very nervous, and a lot of business models and a lot of products are becoming endangered, right? And so that's why OpenTofu has been such a resounding success.
Yeah, makes sense. And then you build a top. You told me before this conversation we had that it's kind of a multiplayer mode for your Spacelift, right? It's built for enterprises, so that
mainly,
So give us a little bit of a quick overview of what it does and why companies choose it.
Yeah. So Spacelift is for IaC, infrastructure as code, what GitHub is for Git. You can run Terraform, or you can run Pulumi or CloudFormation from your command line, from your laptop. And as long as you're the only person working in the company, then it's probably fine. The moment you start working as a team, it's like trying to build software without some central server. Technically speaking, you could send each other's like patches Git patches or Git devs, and you could review it. You can rebase on top of patches, but like no one works this way, right? Everyone works for GitHub because it's just more efficient. It's like you want to centralize this workflow. You don't want to step on each other's toes. You don't want to have unresolved conflicts, right? This is where centralization gives you that flexibility and control and speed. And essentially, this is what Spacelift is, right? We, technically speaking, we're a CI/CD platform for infrastructure as code. Mm-hmm. But from a functional point of view, we serve as a multiplayer mode for any sort of infrastructure work. So we connect different pieces of your infrastructure. We make sure that the changes are reviewed, that they're compliant with your company policies, because like policy as code is another huge layer. It's not just Terraform, but it's like OpenTofu, Pulumi, but also Open Policy Agent, right? So you get a lot of like automated review, automated notifications, incidents being fired, etc. if something goes wrong. Really just automation around the process of building, deploying, and monitoring the deployment of infrastructure.
Okay, so it's also a lot of workflows you can define and these things.
Yeah, dependencies between different parts of your infrastructure, right? So your infrastructure is always a graph. But sometimes if you're a large company, that graph would comprise of hundreds of thousands of elements. So you can't really manage them as one graph anymore. You need to manage them as individual graphs. But then you have a problem with graph of graphs, right? Because those things are always connected. There's always some form of connection between pieces, right? It's very rarely that a part of infrastructure, a piece of infrastructure is entirely self-contained. Yes, you do have them, but most of the time the company infrastructure is a graph of graphs. And then you go from how do I synchronize a huge graph to how do I synchronize multiple small graphs. It's a better problem to have, but it's still a problem, still a challenge that you need to solve. And this is where Spacelift comes in.
Yeah. And by the way, very similar to what we have in observability, right? We also kind of maintain a graph of the infrastructure components and the components that run on top of the infrastructure, right? The application components, services, so that we understand the dependencies, right? So if, I don't know, you have a problem in a cloud, in a zone, that you can understand, okay, what is the impact, right? Because without the dependencies, which you can create on many ways, but tracing is a good example for it, to understand the flow and the dependencies, it wouldn't work, right? That's
I think a graph of graphs in Terraform and infrastructure is not very different from something like a service map in observability.
Exactly. Yeah, it's true. And so, talking about observability, I know you're a Datadog customer, right? So how do you use observability internally?
So we use two main observability tools. We use Datadog for almost everything. And we use, I think they're called differently now, but they used to be called the bug snacks. It's like a Sentry clone, right? For exception tracking. Well, I do understand that Datadog does exception tracking. It was not exceptional, pun intended, for us. So the only thing we used outside of the Datadog suite was Bugsnag. We use everything. We use metrics, we use logs, we use APM. We're very heavy on APM. Like we don't do unstructured logging all that much. This is mainly unstructured logs, or maybe like for forensic purposes, right? But for any sort of day-to-day monitoring, that would be metrics. And we also have APM, and we build metrics from APM spans. We also use some of the Datadog value-added services, like, for example, API testing. They call it synthetic testing. We do plug into CI/CD observability a little bit. And we do database monitoring, although we also have a separate database monitor solution. So the reason we use Datadog for that is mainly because we set it up once and forgot to turn it off, I guess. Honestly, I think that's the reason. I can't remember what's the name of that dedicated Postgres solution, but it's pretty good. What I like about the current setup is that everything is connected, right? That you can cross-reference different parts of your infrastructure, that logs and metrics and spans and hosts, you can easily navigate through the whole thing. Is it magical? No, it's normal. It's not that we use some Datadog special magic there. It's just we like the fact that it's connected. And since we've set it up like 5 years ago, we haven't seen much reason to like really change. Well, now maybe with the cost we do, but it's always been an opportunity cost, right? Do we focus on moving off Datadog because they cost us too much, or do we build something that can give us better revenue?
Absolutely. I mean, they're not the leader in this space, or they are the leader in this space for a reason, right? It's a good product.
It is a good product.
A wide range of products, and I like that you said that you are a big APM user, because still I'm in the APM space for 25 years now, and I'm a big believer in APM. But still, a lot of our customers that we talk to are not using tracing APM too much. They are still very much in the logging era, right? I don't know really why, but I think it's still a lot of developers tend to prefer logs over tracing, though tracing and APM can be much more powerful, right? Especially
it gives
for
you the
getting
full context, right? Logs. Well, with logs, you understand maybe the scale at which something is happening, because you can group logs and see like what are the common, I don't know, log lines or patterns. With APMs, you get the whole understanding of what was the call stack, right? How did we even get to calling this particular log line, right? Because it's not frequently not obvious how I got here.
I personally think it's really about control, right? I think developers love to have full control, and with logs, you use a logging framework and you can basically log. Where in APM was, and I'm turning now into the OTel discussion, right? But before OTel, it was pretty much proprietary, and it was kind of magical, right? You had an agent which did kind of auto instrumentation, and I had this company in Stana, right? That, talking about HashiCorp, was also sold to IBM. We sold to IBM in 2020.
Nice.
And our kind of approach was to have this auto discovery on the agent side, right? You use the agent, it would discover, oh, there's Node.js running or Java or .NET, and then it would inject an agent and would trace out of the box, right? You don't have to do anything, which I always loved. But what I figured out is that some developers, they don't like it, right? Because it's the magical part also means you are kind of losing control of what's happening. So developers kind of like if they have full control, right?
It might be a bit noisy, do I think about this? But I've worked with systems like this. I do believe that New Relic did something like this for Ruby applications. Like you didn't touch anything, and it was auto-instrumented for you. Back from my Ruby days. I haven't used New Relic for ages now, but yeah.
Yeah, I would say it's still very similar to Datadog these days. It's big also. Probably more than $1 billion in revenue. So it's a huge platform, and it's a good tool too.
Yeah, it's just I haven't had a chance to use it. I used it back when I was doing a bit of Ruby.
Yeah, they started in the Ruby space, right?
Yeah, they're magical. They're magical.
Exactly. And so, but I heard that you also switched to OTel internally in parts, right?
Yes.
Give me some of your thoughts around it, and why did you do that?
Sure. So the very immediate reason why you switched to OTel is that we started as a SaaS, like pure SaaS. And in that case, nobody cared what we were using internally for observability. But then we started getting requests for self-hosted. And then when we did for self-hosted, because we were on AWS, the SaaS is still on AWS, the easiest way to ship to customers was to ask them to give us an AWS account, right? So we will give you scripts to deploy and almost the same thing minus some public stuff on your AWS account. And then we can't assume that they have Datadog anymore. I mean, they might, but they might also not. So we can't really assume that the only thing that they're going to be using is Datadog. However, if they have AWS, then what they definitely have is CloudWatch logs, and they definitely have CloudWatch metrics, and they definitely have X-ray. They can enable X-ray, right? So what, in order to ship to AWS, like self-hosted AWS, we said, okay, if you have Datadog, here's the magic incantation to use Datadog telemetry, but if not, then what we do out of the box is we will be using AWS building blocks. And now what we had to do is we had to take all of the code that was used to instrument Datadog or instrument things with Datadog and make it work with AWS tooling. Luckily, we always did middlewares. So it was a well-defined interface between the code and Datadog. So the code didn't even know that it was dealing with Datadog. We had our own abstraction layer that we used Go internally, so it passed the context around, and in the context you had the ability to essentially call your current flavor of observability, be that logs or APM or metrics, right?
Like an interceptor or something.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's so we had it for Datadog and we had it for X-Ray, and at that point people started asking us, okay, well, but we want a full autonomy. We want to set up on GCP. We want to set up in a fully air-gapped environment, and okay, so I can't assume Datadog anymore, and I can't assume AWS anymore. What can I assume? Well, there's just one thing that you can assume, and luckily Datadog can use it, AWS can use it, everything can use it. And if your observability system doesn't speak OTel, frankly, it's your observability system's problem, not mine, right? Then you're running something really obsolete, and at which point I can't really help you much other than spitting everything to standard out, which I do anyway. So if that's okay, observability, if that's enough observability for you, then fine. But otherwise, OTel is what you can use. Turns out everyone speaks OTel these days. Even legacy vendors have some form of OTel compatibility. So it's never, since we implemented OTel, it's never been a problem.
No, it makes sense. But how was the implementation process? Was it hard, or was it pretty straightforward?
Because of the abstraction layer that we were using, the implementation, it was just about re-implementing interfaces, and Datadog and X-Ray, they followed very similar principles. So it wasn't crazy. We didn't have to rewrite. And we used push-based metrics. We didn't use Prometheus. We used push-based metrics. So it wasn't that crazy to essentially port to auto collectors. Few hundred lines of code tops, and then the ability, of course you need to test it with a few solutions, and then the ability to choose which telemetry system you want to use. I do believe that we still have the ability to use native Datadog, but I wouldn't encourage it. There's absolutely zero value in using this over OTel. And then the documentation is the same for everyone.
No, makes sense. And how do you deal with things like dashboards and stuff? Is it on the customer side? So if you or how do you do that?
We tell them what dashboards they could be using. For Datadog, we have a giant JSON that they can implement, and that gives them the similar dashboard to what we have, but for a single tenant implementation. For other vendors, it's really, we just show them the sort of metrics and the what spans might actually be interesting for them.
We use Perseus, right? Perseus is the new standard, CNCF standard for dashboards. You should look into it.
I don't know, right?
It's a pretty new standard. It's called Perseus.
Or
Perseus.
The mythological
God, right? Yes.
God. Okay.
Yeah. And it essentially is a standardization of the dashboarding format. And,
Brilliant.
Not too many vendors, to be honest, are supporting it yet, right? I think Chronosphere, we do, and 1-2 others. But at least you now have a standard where you could do the same. And it supports infrastructure as code. You can deploy them with the code and do stuff like that, right? And also...
what I really like about standards is it shifts the blame. You can't tell me that I don't support something. I'm using the most common standard. If you're not using the most common standard, it's not my fault. I know it's a bit cynical, but you can't support every vendor that is out there. That's why I really like open standards. It shifts the conversation towards we all need to implement the same standards. Otherwise, it's just like Cartesian product of all sorts of interfaces and all sorts of protocols you could be using, right?
No,
So
100%.
if you're not implementing your, like in your product, if you're not implementing or in your observability stack, you're not supporting open standards, then there's only as much as I can do. Of course, if you're going to pay me $2 million to interface with your proprietary logging system, then I will consider it, right? But like, the responsibility is on you to some extent.
No, and I like what you said, right? You said, okay, but the value of using something proprietary like Datadog is just not there, right? And I mean, if OpenTelemetry is like good enough, or does provide anything you want, why wouldn't you not go with a standard in contrast to being proprietary, right? There's no reason.
There's no reason. And then no vendor has a way to keep you from using, or to keep you using a product that is suboptimal, right? Or lock you into pricing that is not fair. Like if you can quickly move or take your toys and move to another sandbox, then the maintenance of a sandbox is a good reason to actually maintain it in a good shape, right? So it shifts the balance of power in the consumer favor.
So how do you see then OpenTelemetry becoming part of the whole infrastructure as code, Terraform, OpenTofu stack, right? I mean, in the pre-discussion, I learned that there could be a Terraform apply could take 45 minutes and you don't have too many insights, what's happening, what's failing. So what is needed to get that kind of visibility, observability into that stack?
Yeah, so sadly, even today, even with tools like Spacelift, Terraform and similar tools are black boxes. You put your code in and then it spits out either very little or a ton of completely unstructured logs, and best of luck understanding what it does without some like crazy like ETL and analysis and linking that stuff together. It's insane, right? So you can't really understand what that black box is doing. So what OpenTofu has started working on, and they implemented that on their end is OTel. So instrumenting all of the call stacks in OpenTofu to understand how operations are proceeding through the whole dependency graph, the whole call stack in OpenTofu, where things are coming from, how do pieces of infrastructure come together from the code that was fed to it, right? And so it's no longer a black box inside OpenTofu. Sadly, it's still a black box between OpenTofu and providers. Because OpenTofu and Terraform previously has this interesting architecture where the workflow manager is separate from the providers. So you have the central workflow manager, which essentially coordinates providers which are connectors between the central workflow manager and individual APIs. You have an AWS provider, you have a GCP provider, you have an Azure provider from Microsoft, and those providers would abstract the API. So even though you have OpenTofu nicely instrumented, in order to get the full value, you probably want to also have all the providers instrumented. And because the ecosystem is so vast, and because it's third parties supporting those plugins, it'll sadly take probably a bit longer to get there, right? So we'll try to provide increasing value by instrumenting most common providers. Like there's a big five, obviously, and we'll try to instrument them to a point where you get the value. But the long tail, we can't possibly afford to instrument.
And instrumentation
ourselves.
means you added kind of logging, or you added tracing to it?
Tracing, I think.
Oh, that's
more
nice.
tracing, right?
Yeah.
Like logging, there's a limited value of logging in understanding how things are tied together, and it's really like where things are coming from step by step. That flame graph, if you can see that, this is where the value is. Why certain things are being repeated. Maybe your API is rate limiting you, and then you can see which calls for being rate limited, and then you can slice and dice however you want. But you get this, I love flame graphs, right? You get this full view of like what was being retried, when it was being retried, how long it took. But sadly, a lot of that is on the provider. Now, you can still get a lot of value from seeing what OpenTofu was calling, right? And if OpenTofu was calling your provider and your provider was responding with like an error, then you could probably go to the logs and see what that error was, and you already have some value. But if you could have APM for everything, it would be the ultimate observability. And sadly, we're not there yet. It's an aspirational goal.
Yeah, but it's good now that we have the standard. People can do it, right? And it will automatically, if you have a provider and it supports it, it would automatically plug in, right?
As I said, it's like shifting discussions. Like, you're no longer asking, why am I supposed to implement this standard, not that standard? It's like, this is the standard. Like, if you don't want to implement OTel, then you're arguing that observability is unnecessary. Like, what is your point if you're refusing to actually go with the standard, right? You're defending against like common sense, I guess.
No, really have to look into it, because I can also see that you could require some sort of specialized user experience to it compared to a standard trace in an application. Probably, I could see that.
Really,
yeah.
I mean, you can just pass. I think you just pass span IDs through the gRPC calls and through the command line. Like when you're starting a
no, just in terms of visualization, right? Not like maybe.
From what I know,
you think normal trace is good enough?
It's no different than distributed tracing.
Yeah. Okay, that's good. That's good.
Then each provider becomes like a separate service, right? So you have the workflow orchestrators as one service, and then each provider becomes its a separate service, and then you visualize it as a distributed trace.
Yeah, makes total sense. Yeah. Do they have some special semantic convention for the tags already in place? OpenTofu?
Yeah,
that's good.
Yeah,
I have to look into it. That's good. Yeah, because we are slowly coming to the end of the conversation. I love to talk about AI with everyone also. And I saw, so it's probably not by accident, that on your website, there's not too much talk about AI, right? And I guess it's not an accident, right? So how do you see AI in your space, infrastructure as code, and these things evolving? And what do you see working? Where do you see it's a lot of FOMO, right?
I think it's not FOMO. I think it's real. But I think we don't know how to use it. What I see is people using AI in a very shallow way. And I don't want to name names, but some of our competitors have implemented code generation. Like, I will generate Terraform for you. And I'm like, can't Claude Code do it for you? Can't Cursor do it for you? Like, what is the value of Spacelift doing it for you? Like, look, I'm not against AI, and I think it's like internally we put a lot of effort into understanding AI and boosting our productivity with AI. If you really want to be strategic about AI, if you really want your products to live in this AI ecosystem, then you should maybe shift your thinking from how do I do something shiny with AI? Because like generating Terraform code is a parlor trick.
Yeah.
And it's a stupid parallel trick because every IDE extension that deals with Claude Code or ChatGPT or Gemini can do it for you. It's like, what's the point? Like, don't do a parallel trick. Think about how can your platform live in the AI-driven ecosystem? So what we, for example, have been investing it in is MCP. So you can expose Spacelift and Spacelift API through MCP to agentic workflows, right? We have an CLI, so you get a standard SDIO based MCP server. And then you can have agents talk to Spacelift using that MCP or program against Spacelift because we also expose like our programming interface. Like if you want to vibe code something on top of Spacelift API, then we give you the full suite of tools to do it, right? This is meaningful. Generating AI code, like using AI to generate code, or the other thing that we've seen is like, oh, I will provide a magical interface so that you can click on your Terraform code and I will explain this Terraform code for you. Well, yeah, but I can literally take my snippet of Terraform, I can post it in ChatGPT, and it'll do a fine job explaining that to me. It's like, it's a stupid parallel trick. What are you? Are you an interface to ChatGPT? Like, what's the value added that you're using, right? Is it because you want to impress your investors with some sprinkle like AI dust? Or are you treating this seriously as a potential paradigm shift? And I treat it seriously. That's why you don't see all that much on AI on Spacelift, because I think we're still in discovery mode, what it means to be a good citizen of the CI ecosystem. And my feeling, it's not about showing shiny, like, oh, look, I made ChatGPT do this for you. I made Claude do this for you. It's shallow. I think there's much more potential that we can use. But I don't think it's FOMO. I think it's
but
huge.
It is funny because we haven't talked about this before, but we came to the exact same conclusion. And we did exactly the same. We just launched our MCP server and we have integrations with all the coding agents. And we came to the same conclusion, saying, why would we do a chat interface into our tool? Why would we build another, hey, build me a query or whatever, fix me code? Because the way it should be is that in Claude Code or Cursor or wherever, you just connect to the MCP server and say, okay, take that information from there zero and be natively integrated. We came to the exact same conclusion. Yes.
Yeah. And I think it's the future, right? So it's, in a sense, like you're working with AI. You're not trying to build AI. You're working with AI. And interestingly, AI itself, I think it's becoming commodity, right? But you end up using Claude or ChatGPT or Gemini. Honestly, I had the exact same success with connecting to all of them. It's like the differences now is like 2%, 3%. Some are better than this, some are better than that. But to me, it almost feels like you're plugging in, like, it's like an electricity socket. Like I plug my agent, I plug my workflow into one agent or the other agents. Like they're using different modes. Like same thing, honestly. Probably AI aficionados will call me crazy, but to me, I get almost the exact same results these days.
And I mean, when I think Anthropic released MCP, right? They said it's like USB for AI, right? It's a standard plug. And I like the idea, right?
Yeah. Especially they also have remote MCP now.
Yep.
I mean, both standards are good. I mean, sometimes you want local, sometimes you want remote, but I think remote gives you the sort of SaaS friendliness with MCP.
Yeah, Marcin, thank you for joining Code Red. It was fun talking to you. It was very quickly. I learned a lot, which was really interesting. I love the final discussions around AI because we see exactly the same, that a lot of our competitors are adding this AI sprinkles. And we totally agree that you should be fully integrated. It's meaningful. It's there. It's impressive what you can do with those agents, right? And you have to become part of it.
Yes, that's our strategic goal as well.
Thank you, Marcin.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. I'm always sharing new insights and insider knowledge about observability on LinkedIn. You can follow me there for more. The podcast is produced by DevZero. We make observability easy for every developer.